Hi, I'm Ashley, and today Jeff, Nick, and I will be talking about a disruptive yet innovative new payment technology called Bitcoin. Today we'll be covering an overview of what Bitcoin is, the mechanics behind how it works, the ways in which individuals can acquire Bitcoins, and how they make transactions. We'll also talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of using Bitcoin, as well as current hot topics in the news today. One of the most interesting things about Bitcoin is the mystery around who actually created the technology. What we do know is that it was created in 2009 by someone using the alias Satoshi Nakamoto. Recently, there have been some new articles claiming they've figured out the name and identity of the real founder, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Bitcoin's a peer-to-peer payment network that allows for online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Key benefit being there are no transaction fees and no need to give your real name. It's also more resistant to inflation and the corruptness of some banks. It can be viewed as cash for the internet. Bitcoin's open source, meaning the protocol and software are published openly on GitHub, and any developer around the world can review the code or make their own modified version of the Bitcoin software. Though it seems more complex, Bitcoin is really just a mobile app or computer program that provides a personal virtual wallet and allows a user to send and receive Bitcoins to and from other virtual wallets. Upon first registering an app or a program, you receive a Bitcoin address that you will use for a transaction. You can then give the address to others for payment, similar to how email works. The difference between Bitcoin addresses and email addresses lies in the fact that a Bitcoin address is only good for one transaction, and then a new one will need to be created for the next transaction. Because of the open source nature, nobody owns the Bitcoin network, much like nobody owns the technology behind email. Bitcoin users control Bitcoin. While developers are able to make changes and work on Bitcoin software improvements, they can't force changes to the protocol because all users are free to choose what software and version they use. Users in the same Bitcoin network need to make sure they are staying compatible in using the same software and complying with the same rules. In other words, using the same client. Behind the scenes, the Bitcoin network is sharing a public ledger called the blockchain. Mining is the process of adding transaction records to Bitcoin's public ledger of past transactions. The entire Bitcoin network relies on the block ledger. All confirmed transactions are included in the blockchain. This way, Bitcoin wallets can calculate their spendable balance, and new transactions can be verified to be valid spending Bitcoins that are actually owned by the spender. The integrity and the chronological order of the blockchain are enforced with cryptography, which at a high level is the practice and study of techniques for secure communication in the presence of third parties. Mining not only adds transaction records to the ledger, it also is the mechanism used to introduce new Bitcoins into the system. Bitcoin miners use powerful computers to track and compile pending Bitcoin transactions every 10 minutes into a new block. These miners then set to work doing the intensive number crunching required to verify all transitions in the block. It's a very competitive process. And the first miner to solve the algorithm and verify the transactions transmits the results to the entire Bitcoin network. Upon confirmation by the rest of the network, the block is then added to the blockchain. Whomever wins the computational race gets a prize. Winners of the mining process are paid transaction fees as well as a subsidy of newly created coins. This both serves the purpose of disseminating new coins in a decentralized manner, as well as motivating people to provide security for the system. The authenticity of each transaction is protected by digital signatures corresponding to the sending addresses, allowing all users to have full control over sending Bitcoins from their own Bitcoin addresses. Digital signatures are a key part of transactions, so now I'll pass it over to Jeff to break down the transaction process.
let's go over how to acquire Bitcoins. The first step to acquiring Bitcoins is to make a wallet. A wallet is a location where one stores their Bitcoins. Like email, the wallet interacts with other wallets so that people can send and receive Bitcoins. One may have a local wallet that is hosted on their local machine or their mobile device, or an online wallet which would be hosted by a service. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. A local wallet might get stolen, or the device on which it's stored might crash, whereas a hosted wallet might get hacked. So just in real life, if you lose your wallet, or if you lose your password to your wallet, you might lose your Bitcoins. After one has a wallet set up, one needs to fill it. You can do this by mining or by purchasing Bitcoins, or by selling something and having someone pay you in Bitcoins. As Ashley mentioned, currently, when one discovers a block, one is rewarded with 25 Bitcoins. At $457 each as of the 31st of March, that equals $11,425. A nice sum. However, there is no guarantee that you will ever even find a block. There's no such thing as being 20 or 75% of the way towards finding a block. You don't make progress towards solving it. After working on solving it for a day or for a year, your chances of happening upon the right combination of numbers required to create a usable block are equal to what your chances were at the start, or at any moment. It's like trying to flip 50 coins at once and have them all come up heads. Each time you try, your chances of success are the same, but if you do it millions of times, you might actually succeed. While the chances of discovering a block are very remote, the computer, the miner, will draw power as it calculates day in and day out. There are plenty of Bitcoin profitability calculators that show that profitability is as simple as getting the hash rate, the speed of calculation, or the number of times you can flip those 50 coins, keep that very high, while keeping the cost of hardware and energy low. However, high hash rate hardware is expensive, running into the thousands of dollar range, and they draw a lot of power. And because finding blocks is increasingly difficult, every time a new block is found, the next block is that much harder to find, the existing hardware, no matter how large its current hash rate, will quickly become obsolete. Which is a long-winded way of saying, don't mine for Bitcoins if you aren't very serious and very smart. The most profitable way to mine Bitcoins is via a botnet of infected computers that mine for you and whose hapless owners absorb the hardware and energy costs. That option is sadly illegal, but nevertheless in use at this very moment. Now, if mining isn't your speed, you can simply shell out cash for Bitcoins on an exchange. There are numerous exchanges that will facilitate trades between buyers and sellers, but they aren't regulated or overseen like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. For example, Mt. Gox, an exchange that at one time was handling 70% of all Bitcoin transactions, recently collapsed after it was revealed that it had been gamed. They'd been shelling out too much, and they ran out. So, if you're patient, you may see a Bitcoin ATM coming to a town near you. These will theoretically allow people to walk right up to a machine, enter cash, and receive Bitcoins, or even the opposite. Now, one does not actually own Bitcoins. There's no such thing as a singular standalone Bitcoin, such as Bitcoin number 1546J. One cannot point to a string of code and say, that is a Bitcoin. What we instead have is a community that agrees on how many Bitcoins each other has, all by referencing a chain of every transaction ever. That record is called the blockchain. And this is also why mining is necessary, to add a new block with the latest transactions embedded into it to the chain. Now, right now, many miners will process transactions into the block for no fees, because the reward in Bitcoins for the discovery of the block itself is sufficient. However, the reward in Bitcoins for miners is ever decreasing. Once it was 50 coins per block, and now it's only 25. And as the block reward for Bitcoins decreases, transaction fees may become more prevalent. And eventually, as the number of Bitcoins reaches its predetermined cap at 21 million, there will never be more Bitcoins minted than that. Transaction fees will be the only way that miners will be compensated. Because there's no such thing as a singular standalone Bitcoin, merely balance records, one needn't exchange whole coins, and transactions are easily divided into smaller increments. A Satoshi, a nod to Satoshi Nakamoto, is 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin. And it is possible to send transactions as small as 5,430 Satoshis on the Bitcoin network, or about 8.5 cents.
Thank you, Jeff, for that explanation. Ashley started out by introducing you to the Bitcoin and explaining the Bitcoin network. Jeff looked more closely at how you could acquire Bitcoins, the background of the Bitcoin transactions, and the model for this decentralized online currency. You may still be wondering, what does this all mean? There are several advantages and disadvantages to Bitcoin, so you should certainly consider each of these before deciding if Bitcoins are right for you. Let's first take a look at the advantages. Payment freedom. Bitcoin transactions can occur anytime, any place. Just as the internet age has helped bring aspects of our society to a 24/7 demand-centric market, Bitcoin does the same in a banking environment for sending and receiving payments. Forget bank holidays, open hours, closed hours, business hours. As long as you have an internet connection, then your Bitcoin wallet is open for business. Another advantage is the low fees. As Jeff mentioned, folks that contribute to the network by mining for Bitcoins, trying to discover the next segment of the blockchain, they get a small fee paid to them, which could include the 25 Bitcoin reward for the winner each time. This translates to a very low, or in many cases no, fee for the end user, you and I. The average transaction processing fee today is between 2 to 4% if we're talking about banks, credit card services, PayPal, or maybe even Western Union. Bitcoin is looking to change that and will likely not continue to be free, but certainly below the 2% range and much closer to, I would say, 1%. Another advantage for Bitcoin is the security. Bitcoin transactions can be made without any personal information attached to them, and this helps prevent identity theft because of a careless merchant. We can all think back to the recent Target incidents. Additionally, you can protect your Bitcoins with backup and encryption. If we're really going to think of Bitcoin as the cash of the internet, do you think the bank would take a photocopy of your $10 bills as a backup? Not likely. The final advantage that I'd really like to highlight is the fact that Bitcoin is transparent and neutral. All of the information about the Bitcoin money supply is available in the blockchain. It is readily available in real time if you want to verify transaction details. Even further, nobody has control of the network. No government, no organization that oversees. Therefore, they can't manipulate it. And a lot of that is protected too with the cryptographic security that Ashley spoke about. In my opinion, this is a significant advantage for Bitcoin being transparent and neutral and actually being legitimate. Let's look at a few of the disadvantages now. The first disadvantage is Bitcoin acceptance. Many people are still not familiar with Bitcoin. There are more businesses beginning to accept Bitcoins, but it's lacking something called network effect. And Bitcoin needs to be much more popular to benefit from that network effect. What is network effect? It's the effect that one user of a Bitcoin, or really any product or service has to the other people that are part of that same product or service network. When network effect is present and you have more people using a service or product, the value of that product or service is much greater than it would be if others were not part of it. Very good example is Facebook. The value and benefit of Facebook today is derived because of the user base and the membership. If you didn't have all those users, the value would be almost non-existent. So that's a very good example of network effect. Without that, that's certainly a disadvantage to Bitcoin as it is in its early stages and still needs to mature. Another disadvantage for Bitcoin is the volatility, again because it's an early technology. Small events, Bitcoin trades, or maybe other transaction activities can affect the price. Over time, this volatility will decrease as the Bitcoin markets and the technology mature, but compared to a more stable currency like the US dollar, the Bitcoin could easily move 10% in value in a single day, whereas the US dollar would not see that big of a shift on a single day. If you do decide to acquire Bitcoins, you should have a risk tolerance for this type of volatility. Third disadvantage is ongoing development. This software is still considered to be in beta, with many incomplete features that are in active development, new tools, services, all to make Bitcoin more secure and accessible. Most Bitcoin businesses are also new and still do not offer any insurance. Basically, Bitcoin is still in the process of maturing. I think all three of these disadvantages highlight that. Let's take a closer look at some recent news stories to help paint a picture of where Bitcoin is today and where it may be in the near future. So what are some of the recent news stories for Bitcoin? I'll highlight one from an overseas exchange that's not such good news, and two related to the states here in the US that may point to a brighter future. First, and something that many of us are likely to have heard of, is the Japan Bitcoin exchange called Mt. Gox, which recently lost over $600 million in customer money of Bitcoins. There is some question as to how the money was really lost, but Mt. Gox claims it was through fraud in a known bug of Bitcoins. Here in the States, it's not quite as grim. Recently, an important story was that the IRS did take a position to treat Bitcoins like property. The reason this is important is because it demonstrates a degree of legitimacy that would be very important if Bitcoin is going to take a foot and become the preeminent online currency. So having the IRS weigh in on this is quite important. Another important story is Bitcoin ATMs may be seen in the US. Currently, there's only one in California, but the company that makes the machines has back orders for more than 100, and they recently debuted the Bitcoin ATM for Congress. Those are just a few of the recent news stories to try and give you a better perspective on Bitcoin and where it's at today. For now, Bitcoin is still young and maturing, but we are all too familiar with how fast new technology can become commonplace. So keep informed on the progress of Bitcoin and how it may impact you. I want to thank you for taking the time to learn about Bitcoin from Ashley, Jeff, and I. If you have any questions, you can comment in the section below.